Hi, good afternoon. Today we have Neeru from the Equal Opportunities Commission. Hi Neeru, how are you?
Hi, thank you. I'm very good. Nice to have you here at the EOC office.
Thank you, thank you. So if you could just tell us a bit about the EOC and the whole role of the EOC in Hong Kong.
Okay, the EOC, which stands for the Equal Opportunities Commission, is a statutory body which was set up 20 years ago.
Okay.
And we're responsible for implementing the anti-discrimination laws in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And there are 4 anti-discrimination laws as of now. We have the Sex Discrimination Ordinance, the Disability Discrimination Ordinance, the Family Status Discrimination Ordinance, and the Race Discrimination Ordinance.
Right.
So these are the 4 that we are responsible for. We handle complaints, we do policy work, we do research, we do training. We also have a legal team.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's our story.
Okay, wonderful. Right, so today's topic, we are going to be talking about the race issue, and in particular with rental and property. So how do you find this issue in Hong Kong? I believe there's racism not only in terms of acquiring property, but even across other areas as well. So how do you find this issue in general in Hong Kong? Is it, is it very alarming?
So the way we look at it, we've got 2 ways to judge
Right.
The issues related to race discrimination in Hong Kong. One is what we get as feedback from the community. The other is the actual complaints that we receive and we handle. So if we look at what we're hearing in the community, then definitely education, employment, accommodation, all of these are important issues. If you look at complaints that we handle, then frankly the number is not that large.
Right.
But we do understand that it's not easy for people to come forward and actually make a complaint, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist and the problem doesn't exist.
Sure.
But we have some statistics to go by. Last year, September 2016, we'd commissioned a study, and we received the findings from that study, which had to do with race discrimination encountered by the non-Chinese in what we call the access to goods, facilities, and services. So
Right.
property is one among them. And it did turn out that accommodation, that is renting of properties, was the biggest concern.
Okay.
And was followed by access to financial services, which means opening a bank account, getting a credit card, getting a loan, all of that featured next. And then of course you had a range of other issues like retail, the treatment, when they go shopping, catering. So these were some of the other concerns, but definitely accommodation was at the top.
Wow. Okay. And this being the Asia's world city, that is quite alarming.
Yeah.
And with property itself being hard to acquire, without the racism issue, with the added racism issue, I can imagine how tough it would be for.
Yeah. Again, it's. I think. The thing that we've got to look at is that whether we can say that it's racism right across when you look at the property sector, and I'm talking specifically about renting, not buying. But I think you have to look at the demographics of the segments of the non-Chinese society which is actually affected by it. And even though we don't have detailed analysis on this, but one can say when we hear stories and when we do outreach, that it's largely the low income category of people who get affected. And if you look at community-wise, I would think the Pakistanis have it the hardest, perhaps.
Okay.
Maybe then there are Indians, there is Nepalese, there's the whole host of them, but I think the Pakistani community in particular. And then also it depends on which area in Hong Kong you're talking about.
Right.
So there are areas which have a worse problem than others. I'll give you an example. I mean, if you look at Hong Kong Island, and let's say you go to mid-levels where you have a whole lot of non-Chinese, but they're all a different category. They're completely different economic category. They come in as expats. They're probably bankers and things. They would not encounter any racism when they go to rent a property.
Okay.
But if you go into the Yau Chi Mong district, you go into Sham Shui Po, where the property prices, you're looking at a different income category then. So those are the people who face more of an issue.
Right, right.
Right.
Wow. So how would you as the EOC sort of tackle this, or how would you firstly detect it?
So, like I said, we do a lot of. So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Mhm.
So, how do we get to know about it? Like I said, we hear from the community.
Right.
So I work with the Ethnic Minorities Unit,
Mhm.
which was set up in 2014. So it's a unit within the EOC that deals exclusively with race-related issues or issues related to the ethnic minorities.
Okay.
So we do a lot of outreach activities. We have our networking with NGOs which work with the ethnic minorities. So we get a lot of feedback
Right.
from them. Then of course is our complaint channel where we actually receive complaints of discrimination. So that's statistics that we maintain.
Mhm.
How do we deal with it? Again, if it comes to us as a complaint, then a complaint gets processed.
Right,
It goes through
right.
the normal complaint handling process. So there's a clear-cut, path there. But the most important thing I think that we do is the publicity, the education, because one of the things that even came out in this study is a lot of people are not even aware of where to go and make a complaint, what to do if they have an issue like this.
Mhm.
They probably don't even know that there is a race discrimination ordinance which prohibits this kind of behavior. So that education and awareness effort, that is something that we are constantly doing.
Okay.
The other thing that we've started to do when we receive and we realize the magnitude of the problem is to go to the Estate Agents Authority, which is like a governing body for estate agents. And we've done several training sessions with them.
Mhm.
We have a booklet which is information for estate agents and prospective tenants,
Okay.
talking about the law, talking about situations, what they can do, if they have a problem.
Right.
So these are the various things that we are doing. Of course, then there is always our submissions to the government.
Mhm.
And asking their intervention or their help, making recommendations to them
Okay.
on issues like this. And we've actually recommended in our last submission, which was in March earlier this year, because there is right now a LegCo subcommittee
Okay.
on the rights of ethnic minorities. So one of their panels was on housing, and we made a submission there, and where we've urged the government to actually undertake this kind of broad mass media, big publicity campaign, to the general masses,
Right.
because a landlord is the general public, so we want an attitudinal shift, and that takes time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. So if you could just, take us back through from 2014 up to now, how has the trend been like, or in terms of statistics? What have you noticed?
So I like I said, we don't have too many statistics to go with when it comes to complaints.
Right.
Because it's always hard for people to come forward and make a complaint, and
Sure.
I wouldn't look at those statistics as an indicator of
Okay.
the problem.
Right.
Because it's a fraction of what actually probably takes place.
Mhm.
And we know this because, when we say, come to us and make a complaint, and they're like, how many times do I come here? Because if I'm looking for a house, I get rejected by like 15 landlords before I find one
Yes.
who's willing to, rent his property to me.
Sure.
So that would not be an indicator. If you're looking at trends, I think there is a little more awareness, both on the side of the prospective tenant as well as the landlords. So the landlords are also aware, the estate agents are also aware that they could be breaking the law
Mhm.
if they reject someone outright
Right.
and state race as the reason.
Mhm.
So sometimes this kind of awareness has led to them becoming a little more creative in their excuses and not stating race outright.
Mhm.
But in terms of actual numbers, I really can't give you a number.
Okay. Okay,
as in,
sure.
like, is it growing? Has it gone down?
Right,
But
right.
I can sense that there is an increasing awareness, at least, that there is a law which
Right.
protects against this kind of discrimination.
Okay, and we can only hope that with awareness, then the problem would get, more.
Problem has to get better.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right,
problem has to
right.
get better,
Mhm.
but definitely the problem exists.
Exists.
It does exist.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we were to sort of analyze why that would be, what are the possible reasons as to, the people sort of getting rejected for their race? Is there?
So the EOC firmly believes that any discrimination actually stems from certain bias or prejudice, certain stereotyping.
Okay.
Now, if a landlord has had a certain experience with someone from a particular race,
right.
then he or she, and this is in a way human tendency to kind of broad brush and say everybody from this community is probably going to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite interesting. The study that we did, which was the study on discrimination, which I said the report came out in September last year.
Right.
Some of the interesting things, because the study also went and spoke to property agents.
Okay.
Okay, so not only did we talk to consumers,
Mm-hmm.
who were like mystery shoppers, so they didn't reveal their identity,
Right.
but they spoke. And we had some interesting points being made. So even though property agents said that we treat everybody the same and there is no discrimination, but they acknowledged that some Chinese property owners did not want to lease their properties to ethnic minorities because
Mm-hmm.
they worried that ethnic minorities may not pay on time. They may
Not
cause
pay on time.
disturbance to neighbors, such as smelly food. Now, this is something that I think we've heard. They may leave the properties messy and with the cooking smells when they actually vacate the property.
Okay.
So they did acknowledge that there are cultural differences and maybe there's not enough awareness about those cultural differences.
Right.
They were open to admit that. The other thing that property agencies said is ethnic minorities like to haggle over the prices and benefits. So that's seen as a negative.
Okay.
And certain communities, have larger family sizes.
Absolutely.
So they do say that they found that they would underreport the number of persons that would be living in the property,
Mm-hmm.
but actually there would be a lot more
Okay.
than originally declared.
Right.
And therefore it leads to a deterioration of the property and the fixtures much faster. So this is coming straight from them.
Okay.
As some of the reasons stated by landlords.
Mm-hmm. And there are some valid reasons as well.
There
So-
are some, but again,
right.
like we say, you cannot broad brush, you cannot
Absolutely.
generalize
Right.
and say, and therefore treat an entire community in that manner. It's got to be case by case.
Of course. Right. This is outright generalization. You cannot.
Exactly,
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to do this, we're spreading awareness and sort of
Yeah.
incorporating the laws more forcefully, would you say?
I don't think you can enforce the laws more forcefully because the laws are strong enough. I mean,
Right.
you have to establish that the rejection or the refusal to rent or a certain behavior was because of that person's race.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's enough for it to become race discrimination. That's
Okay.
what the law says.
Sure.
That if the treatment
Mm-hmm.
is on the ground of the person's race,
Right.
then it would be race discrimination. So
Mhm.
the law is there. The thing is, I think the effort is to spread awareness about that law, and for both parties,
Exactly,
for both
right.
the tenants to be aware of their rights.
Mhm.
So when they go in looking for a property, they should be aware that these are my rights,
Right.
and also for the landlord to know
Mm-hmm.
that they could be breaching the law if they reject someone outright just on the ground of race.
Okay. Now, from the point of view of the actual sort of South Asians or the minority group, what can they do from their side rather, to help the situation or to, besides going through the legal process, is there anything that they can do from their side? Would you say that it's not right to bargain, or, if they're in a situation where they're sort of financially constricted in some way, what would be sort of the advice going forward to these groups who are looking for a property and are sort of stereotyped by sort of these criteria?
So I can't give you any the only advice I can give from the EOC point of view
Right,
is to be
right.
aware of your rights. So when you go in, and to make sure that you are not breaking the law in any way. I mean, so if there are contractual terms,
Right.
make sure that you're abiding by those.
Right.
Make sure that the documents you provide are correct. They are, not expired, because I have a case here where a complaint was brought to us and they claimed race discrimination, and we did take up that case. But it turns out that when we went in and investigated, the landlord said that the documents that they provided were way past the expiry date. So we had to drop the case.
Okay.
So now these are things that, as a good tenant, you should be doing.
Right, absolutely.
And make sure that, you keep the property well. You have to be considerate to your neighbors. So those are general things.
Sure.
And I think, like I said, to counter a stereotype that's been established,
Right.
you need to make a lot more effort, and as a community.
Exactly.
Right? So I think that effort needs to be made. But again, that is not from the law point of view, but that is just good advice.
Yes, and it is a balance. Like on the one hand, they cannot not cook their curries, or they cannot.
Correct.
So they need to sort of, I guess, reach a compromise.
Yes, so one of the things that we do tell people is that get to know your neighbors. So it's very hard to be mean or nasty to someone you know, right?
Absolutely.
So if you're living in a housing estate or something, make friends. I mean, the easiest thing to do would be an exchange of food, exchange greetings during your special days. I mean, once you become friends, then it's very hard to criticize, actually.
That's
so
true.
a little effort at integration.
Right. Building that personal connection.
Correct.
Right.
So don't live in your own little ghetto. You make that effort to integrate.
Right. So merge with the local community as well, and
Exactly.
that would be.
So they appreciate your culture and you appreciate theirs.
Absolutely. It has to work both ways.
Right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Right. So, have you noticed any difference between, like as you said, these problems are mainly in terms of rental, but in terms of sort of buying the property, have you noticed
I
any
haven't
difference?
actually come across anything there. No, not really.
Okay.
And also, I think the communities that are most affected would not be looking at buying properties.
Right.
The ones
That's
that
right.
we receive complaints from are the ones who are actually just renting property or trying to get into housing estate. The one odd cases that I have heard where they had their own property was more to do with the the management of the building.
Okay.
So if you're an owner, then you're part of that owners committee, and one odd complaint I can recall is when the person felt that he was not being allowed to participate because the language was all, it was all the communication, the notices, everything was coming only in Chinese, and this person felt a bit sidelined, even though he was an owner and had equal rights in that building.
Okay. Okay, so it's primarily those looking for, renting and would you say the most prominent locations would be like Jordan, Shamshui-Po, and Yuen Long, and
Yeah, I think wherever there's a higher concentration of the South Asians, particularly the low income category. But I've also heard, from areas which have fewer non-Chinese, they would also have a problem because they're not used to having non-Chinese, people renting their homes. So
Right.
even if you're looking at a higher income, higher rental property, the thing is they're just not used to dealing with a non-Chinese. So I heard a complaint, not a formal complaint, but I'd heard about a case in Ma On Shan.
Okay.
So this person wanting to rent an apartment there and was having trouble getting one because
Right.
it was primarily a Chinese community there.
Okay.
So you also have that. So I would definitely think that the more cases we hear are from the lower
Lower strata.
the lower strata. Yes.
Right. So once you do receive a complaint, so what's like the general blueprint of the entire process?
Okay. So when we receive, so there is something called an inquiry
Right.
and something called a complaint.
Okay.
So an inquiry is basically you just call up and you want to talk to someone in the EOC, a case officer, and just say, hey, I've been through this. this is what's happened with me, what do you think I should do?
Right.
It's just an inquiry and you would get advice.
Mm-hmm.
So that definitely we log it in as an inquiry, but it's not a complaint. But a complaint is when you've decided that yes, I want to make a formal complaint, which
Okay.
means that we register that complaint, you give all your details in there of what has happened, the incident, all of that, and then we send that out to the what we call the respondent,
Right.
the person who's been complained against, and say that there has been a complaint against you.
Mm-hmm.
So then the first attempt by us is to try and do what we call a fast track conciliation. The way we work, we're not like the court, we're not like the police, we don't punish.
Okay.
We don't have adjudication powers, you know,
Mhm.
to say that, hey, you're right, you're wrong.
Sure.
And our effort is basically to resolve the case through conciliation, so you avoid going to court.
Okay.
So we would get both the parties and try what we call a quick, fast track conciliation, get both parties into the room, talk about the complaint, see if it can be resolved. If that doesn't work, then it goes into investigation. So that's when we call for documents, call for evidence,
Mhm.
any witnesses, and we actually go through the case in much more detail, and then go back to the conciliation. Again, we
Okay.
call the parties, and sometimes it takes several rounds.
Wow.
So if the parties conciliate, they reach an agreement,
Mhm.
then there is a legally binding agreement that gets signed, which means
Mhm.
after that they don't take it to court. You can't, because it's supposed to be resolved.
Okay.
And if that fails, let's say the respondent doesn't want to conciliate, doesn't agree, or the complainant doesn't agree to the terms being offered, then the complainant actually has the right to take the matter to court.
Okay.
And these cases first go to the district court, and we provide legal assistance in certain cases, very
Mhm.
limited, but we look at the case, and you can apply for legal assistance.
Okay.
from us.
Alright.
Otherwise, you're free to take it to court. And all the evidence that we collect can actually be presented in court.
Okay. And has that happened a lot?
It hasn't happened a lot. In fact, one of the complaints against the EOC that we don't take too many cases to court. As a principle, we only look at cases, we only take on cases which we think set a strong legal precedent,
Right.
which would be an example, which are not very standard cases which we think others could
Mhm.
deal with.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you identify between like a very strong and really urgent case rather than a case which maybe the complainant is just sort of making a mountain over a molehill?
So for us, every complaint that comes in, we look at. So
Right.
a complaint gets looked at, and if we feel that there is, sometimes complaints get taken in and then, we dismiss them saying there's not enough grounds.
Sure.
But again, it has to go through that process.
Okay.
So we would register a complaint when we think, yes, that there is a likely breach of the law.
Yes.
That's when it gets, and then every case, once it gets taken in, we're not going to say this is more important or this is less important. We have a service commitment.
Mhm.
We've got to look at every case and, discharge it within a certain period of time. So once it comes into the system, they're all the same.
Okay. Okay. Nice. So your process would end either with it going to court or when the case is finally
So
sort
a
of
case
solved.
usually, I would say, not going to court, but
Mhm.
a case is finished when it's either withdrawn.
Right.
For example, they feel, okay, fine, enough, I want to withdraw the case now.
Mhm.
Or it's actually conciliated.
Okay.
So when the two parties agree, to some kind of an agreement,
Mhm.
and it could be anything. The terms of the settlement could be whatever the complainant wants. So sometimes it's just a letter of apology. Sometimes they could say compensation. Sometimes it could be, a change in policy. Let's say they, for employment cases, very often they say we want a certain policy to be changed.
Right.
We think what they're doing is wrong. So it could be that. It could sometimes be just that, provide more training.
Mhm.
It could be anything that the complainant, can
Right.
ask for.
Okay. So it's trying to reach a sort of mutual.
A mutually agreeable settlement.
Right. Okay. If you could just talk us through like a recent case or a.
Yeah, I did get. So I already mentioned the one case where. So see, this is the other thing actually. sometimes we've been told, that just because you're from an ethnic minority, the landlord will or the estate agent will ask you for more documents, more proof. And a lot of people just go ahead and comply with that, because they say it's not asking for too much. It's just that the landlord wants to reassure himself or herself of your financial status and is asking for proof. But even then, that could also be discrimination, because if I, as an Indian, am being asked for those extra documents, and you, as a Chinese or another national, race, is not being asked for it, then it is differential treatment.
Yes.
So that is also racial discrimination. But most people just, and go ahead and comply. So I did tell you about the case where the documents were actually old. So, but then here was another case, and I'm going to read that out. Apparently, this is about an Indian family, which was made up of parents and an adult son. They were ready to rent a flat. So the provisional tenancy agreement is signed, and the agent informed the family that. So after the tenancy agreement, the provisional agreement has been signed, the agent comes back to the family and says that the landlord wants to add some new terms, and basically saying that there should be no more than 3 persons who can reside in the flat, and there's no children allowed. Now this was not a very good thing for the family, because they were planning to get the son was going to be getting married, and then there would be a child, subsequently. Sure. And they felt, they had a strong feeling that the landlord was adding these terms only because they were Indian, and he somehow wanted to get out of the agreement.
Okay.
And they felt that because they'd had a similar experience apparently earlier.
Okay.
So what they did is they didn't lodge a complaint, but they called the EOC to inquire and say, would this amount to race discrimination? So the EOC, they recommended that, we recommended that go and have a chat with the landlord. It's better to not take it any further.
Sure.
Just go and have a chat, explain your situation, and see what happens. And also tell him that there is a possibility of race discrimination.
Yes.
If you impose certain conditions. So actually the discussion helped, because the landlord softened his position, and he said, okay, the new terms are negotiable, and they can be discussed whenever the children came along. So it was fine. And the couple said, we want to be living in this flat, we want to have good terms with the landlord, we just don't want to pursue the case, and they dropped it. So that was one situation which actually worked out quite well, without having to go through the whole, the whole system and the whole, complaint and all of that. So according to the law very clearly says that it is unlawful for a landlord to discriminate against another person on the ground of race in the terms on which he or she offers the person the premises. So the terms, like I said, if it is a certain set of terms for you and a certain set of terms for the other person, and the only difference is race, then that would also be unlawful.
Right.
Okay, so that was one of the cases that we got, and we think it ended well.
Okay, very nice. Looking forward, how do you see this situation getting resolved, or any possible solutions? Or
I think, like I said, I think it's education, more and more of education on all sides. The other thing, of course, we've got to realize is that probably with the changing economic status, changing demographics of the South Asian population, things would change automatically. That would also be a bit of a shift. You can see that with more professionals coming into Hong Kong from the South Asian countries, you can see that the attitudes of certain landlords has already changed in certain areas, though. And again, I'm not going to say this is right across, but in certain areas you can see that they're more than welcoming, because they know that they've got the ability to pay, they're in good jobs, they will keep the house well, they will leave when they're asked to leave. So there are certain things that come with that. And we think with the generation of South Asians who've grown up in Hong Kong and now getting into the workforce, things may actually change automatically.
Right. Okay.
As compared to what perhaps their previous generation went through.
Right. So
but we do think that the attitudinal shift, a little more exposure, more integration, more activities that help integrate the local community with
Right.
the non-Chinese communities.
Right.
I think that has to happen.
Right. And is the EOC working on that, or?
So the EOC works, like I said, we work with the communities, we
Mhm.
work at the government level, we work with NGOs. So these are things that we're constantly saying,
Mm-hmm.
to all our stakeholders,
Right.
and we hope that it's done. Of course, it needs to be done on a much larger scale and more concerted effort, more
Mhm.
sustained kind of an approach. Definitely needs to be done.
Okay. So as more complaints come in, that's actually could be a good thing, as we can sort of get to the root problem and spread awareness and encourage more people to reach out and make a shift.
Yes, so I'd like to use your platform to at least get this, get some advice out, which was that if you have a problem like this, come to us and make a case, make a complaint, or at least report it somewhere, or through your magazine.
Mhm.
Write to your magazine, you publicize it, because number one, we can't act without a complaint.
Right.
Okay, we need that. The second thing is, if you have one successful complaint, it becomes a deterrent,
Mm-hmm.
to the landlord, to the, to
Absolutely.
others, to stop them from repeating that.
Of course.
So I think you need to be able to stand up and, say when things are wrong, when laws are being broken.
Sure.
So that is one thing that I would definitely encourage people to do.
Right. Now, to make a complaint, could they go through your website or sort of call you
Very
up? Or?
simple, actually. But I would always advise that the first step is just call us.
Right.
You'll find our number on the website. Just do eoc.org, and you will find, or eoc.com. Go to our website, and you will find our number. Call us. Tell us this is what has happened. You'll get the best advice, saying, yes, I think there are grounds for a complaint, so make a complaint. Complaint is a simple form which is available online.
Mhm.
You can come in person if you want. And it's not, the thing I always emphasize is it's not like, going to court. It's very different. It's not like, you're going to have to do a lot of paperwork, or you're going to be running around, or there is any expense. All this is free. Okay. It's free of charge, and it's not like you're going to be spending a huge amount of time. We're not going to be summoning you all the time to come and give depositions or anything like that. It's a far simpler process. So, I would encourage you to come and go through the system, make a complaint, make a case, or at least make your voice heard through, a magazine or letter to the editor somewhere, so that people actually are made aware of the fact that, number one, there's a problem like this. Number two, you can actually say something about it. Number three, there are laws in Hong Kong to protect you against
Sure,
that.
sure.
Yeah.
Great. It was lovely talking to you, Ms. Nero.
Thank you.
you very much. And we've been talking to Ms. Nero from the EOC, and she shared her views on the ongoing problem with rental and among the minorities. And let's hope that in future this situation only gets better as time progresses. That's all we have from A Desi Flavor. Thank you.